Mm. Yeah, I really wanted those 3 minutes that Peter was giving us. Yeah, so maybe I might just invite those 3 minutes here. And invite I have so much that's been enlivened through the presentations in a kind of, I don't know, like a natural emergent intelligence of its order. That is also, of course, curated by Peter. But something about Kevin's presentation just was so enlivening. It was so funny. Um, yeah, so I think I would love for just like a moment of quiet to even just feel that quality of almost like that bubbling sense of what laughter erupts out of, like a quality of pleasure, a beingness into just a body that wants to giggle. Yeah, and even just taking a moment to just arrive into my body. I'm noticing there's so much tingling. Um, I feel, yeah, I'm looking at my own screen at something I drew myself, but I'm actually feeling it come even more, kind of pulsatingly alive. And I feel really grateful for this frame to be able to step in and through in sharing about oracular bodies, which is, I don't want to go too far into just the kind of like the research of it. There's a lot of text in the screen in front of you. I'm not going to read all of it. Um, but I just want to share that it is a kind of phenomenological soul study that I've been led into about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I'll only share the beginning, which is there was this sensing into the mystery of oracular being. An oracular being, oracular bodies kind of just swam through almost like a fruiting body of an expression of, yeah, what happens when a world or an utterance or like a vision seems to just kind of pop out like that video out of the soil. And especially in the darkness of the not knowing, where do insights, just true insight, just suddenly break through out of the darkness? So sometimes we encounter those who seem to live in the gap between worlds. Their bodies are more transparent, diaphanous, flickering in the liminal fascia between many planes of reality. They see and fall in love with unimaginable potential. They try to whisper to us about it, even if we don't understand. They are faithful to a different kind of clarity and integrity. When they communicate through silence, strange riddles, and koans, or two by twos, it is with gravity and potency that stirs something deep, a remembrance of the future. So, in the sense, to be an oracular being is to open your body to the gap and to become this porous channel to these temporal streams and currents, to encounter latent potential, to feel and actually make contact with these futures that impregnate you with vision, and then to utter from that unspeakable place of paradox and to courageously declare your vision to the world, transforming your body into a portal to the future. And in that sense, I mean, I come into this work using the words oracular and prophecy, and sometimes it can evoke something lofty and hubristic, like prophecy is predicting or forecasting the future. But that is prophecy in a field of foresight that abides by a linear time. So a kind of like I see this to come. And that is a sight that is limited in the horizontal arrow of Chronos. And also there is this other form of time, Kairos. And in our present, the future begins to whisper through the cracks, through the gaps. And sometimes philosophers have called it the vertical timing of the gods. Insight appears as oracular utterance from the more than human realms, and one develops the capacity to listen through presence. So, in this meeting place between Chronos and Kairos, the oracular body becomes a subtle instrument attuned to the resonant patterns of these latent potentials. The prophecy they begin to embody may prefigure as strange, yet the monstrous and miraculous are co-present. We are allured into the gravitational futuring of these strange new worlds. So I want to bring us maybe more into the felt sensing, the diving deep and sensing in the dark of this kind of mycelial and also imaginal attunement. And yeah, kind of teacher to the liminal network, Bonita Roy, in whatever pieces about lyric culture, which is a kind of like lyrical form of being to navigate back loop realities. And that's in the panarchy loop. There's a kind of deconstructive collapse, a falling apart of the back loop that needs to happen for new growth to emerge. So, kind of in this back loop reality, the navigation and sensefulness of how to move through a collapsing map calls forward these other forms of perhaps like latent potentials, latent capacities, ways in which we've always been able to, as humans, but also as kind of creatures of our collective biome, have been able to make sense. And I want to invite actually, it's something as simple as contact. It's nothing that's like a magical, like very, I don't know, a transcendently mystical way of being. It's actually something as simple as touch. And to touch means to self other. So it's that contact point where self and other meet. And we feel the other and we feel ourselves touching. We begin by feeling forward, the worm crawling, the amoeba stretching, the flagellate flagellating, the neuron feeling forward to connect. The basis of life is touch. So there's this quality of moving forward, but perhaps is it in the vision of a world, or is it something that feels much more present and even postural, erupting through? So I want to invite a kind of different language as metaphor because language is bridge building to postures of the body, ways in which we relate with world. And there's this imaginal realm, this realm of potential, this way of relating with that which is beyond the temporal knowing of Chronos or human sense making. It's often considered like how we relate with the divine realms, this in between intertidal space. And in this imaginal space, it feels like fields and undulation. There's this morphological sense of potential. And I really love actually the Joy Division um, cover. That's actually the kind of like um, the resonance pattern of a pulsar. Um, and what's really fascinating is that it looks like, it looks like kind of a resonance frequency, but it also looks like landscape. And for me, if I were to, like, I mean, so much of what I do is just arising from direct phenomenology of my own experience. But this imaginal sensing of the future is topological in the sense. There's a felt sense of dips or movements and vibrations and ripples of fields of potentiality, and that which feels more dense and matterful, and that which is more dissipating, but also moving towards actualization. And there's these ways in which there's the field, but then there's also this contact that can happen as well, which is like kind of ingression. So are we letting fields of potential then make contact with the body? And that's in that theory of the body as being this mycelial, kind of like fascia-esque, ecological, mutual, noosphere, yeah, way of being able to move through many dimensions of networked sensing. The contact point is actually where life and manifestation and creativity begins to be born. And it's almost like patterns that were in potentia or archetypes just start to almost like move itself into reality and perhaps even erupt. This is like an image of a submarine and underwater volcano just erupting. And I sometimes imagine, like I saw a video of it, but it's just like the slow moving blooming of these clouds of energy from the earth, like from the core of the earth, just erupting through, but held by water. And the potential that also forming new islands that didn't exist before. And then just like in this eruptive quality, there's this quality of like life just wanting to like move through and life forming and something that was perhaps like more diaphanous or field like beginning to like matter itself into being. And there's this the redness and the the image of the mitochondria, just something about these energy stores beginning to metabolically begin to life. It's like life lifing itself into a body that has always been alive, like a bodies of aliveness. Every part of your body is alive at all times. So something about worlding and this I like it's like the human creative capacity to world. So to feel the possibility of something that has not existed and then to bring that to birth it into actuality almost like as something as like a life that hasn't existed before coming into the world. There's something that actually feels incredibly yeah, there's also like a precognitive beneath the surface just like process that's happening that I feel like when I ask this question, if the future already lived inside the body, if the blueprints for how we come into right alignment with evolution and the way life actually naturally harmonizes towards greater wholeness, then we start to experience perhaps in presence this way of experiencing the future, not as something far away that we have to win or fight for, but something that is deeply layered into the yeah, the way that we have it in our nature, and it kind of like emanates and grows outwards and reaches into culture and governance and infrastructure and commerce and fashion. So I almost want to come back to the nature of almost all of these enfolded futures that are just wanting to open up and erupt out of our bodies. So, in envisioning these futures as fields or worlds of latent potential and this capacity for awareness or consciousness to root into that potentiality through presence, then I start to think about, okay, then what are the postures? Like, how do we guide this capacity? How do we remember this with each other? How do we practice wise agency? And something around the alignment of Wu Wei, this kind of Taoist notion of effortless effort has always kind of come through as you kind of move with the flow of something larger than yourself. But there's also this, yeah, way in which something feels to be in alignment, held through the tensegrity of many different ways of sensing. So in oracular bodies, and this came out of actually a lot of interviews, so these ritual interviews I was holding with folks that I consider oracular bodies. So these bodies, yeah, folks that people might know, like Rosa Lewis or Layman Pascal, but just wanting to better know, it's like, what is the phenomenology of being a body that can sense in this other weird, perhaps even more than human way? And there was this, yeah, sense of like a dancing between the visual metaphor of seeing and sight. So vision with also this embodied way of sensing and feeling, and then holding in perspective and intimacy the parallax of sensefulness. So really coming back to the body as the sensing organ of attunement and resonance, and a kind of organ of truth or a valueception, as some might call it that as well. And moving towards, like it's like, oh, my body is naturally attracted towards truth and beauty and goodness, or allured towards more wholeness. And then there's oracular desire, which I just want to say all of these is like a training ground as well. There's a mastery to it, but this dancing between the capacity to release into mystery, but then also to birth and actualize desired potentials. So there's this, again, tension between freedom and like desire, and then being able to, in that tension, almost like break through soul longing into creativity, but like a creativity that again is much more, it's like it's robustly both pattern and also matter. And then we have oracular culture because, of course, there's the body that I inhabit that I consider self, and then there's the many bodies that I inhabit that um, are also part of the sense of the me or the we. And this actually, and this is where the most contact and friction and tension that actually generates the fire for creativity and new world to erupt happens, which is in the tension between the devotion to one's own worlding. So, what is the world that's wanting to birth through me? And then how does that come into relationship and almost nudge up against like foam, like bubbles that kind of like foam up against one another into a world of many worlds, and the balancing of sovereignty and entanglement in that sense. So we have to be very individuated and aligned with the sense of center, and then also in intimate contact with many other centers. And something in that would be the arising of a kind of collective capacity for emergent worlding and transversal wholeness. And transversal for me is a kind of term for, there's universal, one world, pluriversal, many worlds. But the transversal would be almost in a pluriversal sense. When worlds bump up against one another, the friction can actually generate a new world in its latency to erupt through. So there's a whole other plane of potential that needs to synthesize through these moments of contact. So I guess yeah, I want to complete just by saying that this is a quote from um, that I found in an artist's website about Thomas Sarah Menso, I think is his name. But he does a lot of artwork around bringing kind of these visual senses of network and spiders' webs into reality and thinking about matter and interconnection. But this quote just kind of captures something, describing how life is not just about matter and how it immediately interacts with itself, but also how that matter interacts in interconnected systems that include organisms in their separately perceiving worlds. Worlds that are necessarily incomplete, even for scientists and philosophers who, like their objects of study, form only a tiny part of the giant, perhaps infinite universe they observe. So I will, yeah, I'll complete here. There was a video, but I don't know, this feels like a good ending. Thank you.
Let's give a round of applause for Cheryl's presentation. Very lovely. Feel very grounded and peaceful. Um, so yeah, I'll ask Cheryl a question, and feel free to put your shares, thoughts in the chat. What was coming up? First, I'll share, and then I'll ask a question. In Orthodox Christianity, especially kind of the mystical, they have this notion of the nous, and they understand it as the eye of the soul. And where I feel it is sort of in this heart area, and it just kind of has a spacious openness, lightness, lovingness, and definitely got opened up when listening to your presentation. And when it comes to like practices, like how to practice this collectively, I know you deep dive into a lot of these different, what they call intersubjective meditative practices, collective presencing, dialogo, someone mentioned in the chat. Um, our friend Sam Hines, he has this thing coming up too, communal reverie. I'll put it in the chat. I think you helped shape that practice, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so I'm curious if you can speak on what actual practices you use and would definitely recommend people experiment and experience.
Yeah, no, that's a really excellent list. I can really speak through my own portal, which was I had been kind of interested in meditation lightly before, but something around encountering collective presencing on the Stoa during the pandemic um, felt like I was kind of working with yeah, you can call it a social technology, like a we space practice. But I remember there was this way in which, and the intensity. So I think often potential feels like intensity because it's like that which has not yet materialized that is still kind of like vibrating in you. And in that sense, it's like the seed is holding all of that potentiality, and then it kind of needs to like move out. Um, and I realized that for a lot of my life, containment around the intensity of potential is just very challenging. And most of the time, like numbing and actually avoiding it would be the path of just being able to handle it. So I think before, even though I was interested in meditation and all of these kind of like mindfulness practices, it was actually when I entered a we space where it felt like my body and the intensity it's holding just entered a larger body. And I was like, whoa, I'm like accessing space. There's a co-holding that's happening where suddenly this thing that I couldn't even tap into was able to have the a spacious enough holding and a kind of quiet and slowed down temporics, and also a kind of movement of attention towards the middle. So I was able to then move the intensity to the center and have it contact other intensities and then feel into the potential. Yeah, it's like feel into that um, in a way that I'd never been able to before. Or maybe there would be touches of that, but it's like when you go to an amazing, like a fucking amazing concert, for example, and there was that moment where it's the like the band or like the people, like it's like something just happens. There's like a kind of field body that happens, and then you feel this outflow and holding of a lot of resonance. So I think there's a lot of moments where we all experience that, but I and church I think is a space for that too. It's like these resonance chambers that can hold more than what you can hold alone. So I think for me that's why being able to experience, like it's like even in these worldview sessions, the fact that we take in a lot of information and then have a period of time to just slowly collectively like metabolize it, but also not only digest it, but allow these new insights to emerge. I would say that the collective body is much more, yeah, it's just it has a greater capacity and intelligence, and then also a lot more messiness. potential messiness as well and relational entanglement. So I guess like I'm very in kind of response to what you're sharing. I think some kind of movement towards becoming more porous to we space and kind of like these collective forms of awareness, but then also simultaneously working on having like a deep. So this is where doing your own writing, doing your own practice, like really coming back to your own core and your own uniqueness needs to be in some kind of tensegrity together because you can lose yourself in the we as well very quickly.
Yeah, and that was going to be my follow-up question, which is related to Kevin's failure mode of the mycelium trajectory, because there's like it's not all we spaces are made equal. Like, the criticism of like circling, which is the most probably popular one, or like kind of T groups in the therapeutic sense, is that they kind of collapse to the most neurotic person instead of like maintaining, elevating people to individual sovereignty while maintaining that spacious we-ness. Um, I'm curious if you have any thoughts, because I imagine you experienced both of those in we spaces. If you have any thoughts about like if the actual container um, helps, and then the guidelines and the invitations help um, have that more upward spiral rather than the downward one.
Yeah, I'm always longing because I'm also a designer. It's like I'm always longing towards the coming, it's like these simple protocols that have it almost like the simplicity of like a haiku. It's just they're like in an affordance where by simply saying, "Oh, we're speaking to and from the middle." It's like you can try to explain that, but it's more like just a little key. It like bends your awareness towards the center and not from here. And something just shifts in your perception and collective attention as well. So there's the protocols, and the tech, you could say the constraints of the technology. And then it's also, yeah, I think for me, I'm real, I learned through a lot of trial and error that protocols and patterns have to be, are still embodied, and they're still embodied by bodies that can be more experienced or more masterful. And then they can be embodied by bodies that are less experienced and maybe have a lot of like stuff. So even on like a bad day, the way I hold space is very different from on a good day, the way I hold space. So it's not like yeah, it's not static. Um, but I feel like that's why another principle is you never host alone is like a really good CP principle because never hosting alone means that if you are shaky and there's stuff that you're like distorting the field as a space holder, then you always had kind of you have your team to be like to fill in. Um, so I do feel like there's almost I would like to see more of a kind of collective dharma or lineage arise more with clarity and discernment around what it means to do this work with clarity around your own holding, what you're participating in, what you're responsible for, and what makes something well held. Um, but yeah, I would be careful as well and just trust your body if you're entering a container.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, so good. Um, and I have a lot of thoughts on this. And Cheryl and I are in conversation of doing an inverse course specifically on this whole making and these intersubjective meditative practices, sampling them and bringing the kind of people who are quite proficient in them. So staying tuned to that. And so, yes, thank you, Cheryl, for the wonderful presentation and closing off this series. Um, so let's do perhaps 3 minutes just to kind of like ground, put anything in the chat. And then if it's okay, if I can invite all the four speakers up in 3 minutes just to share including thoughts, like as like what you've got from today as a whole and perhaps the series as a whole. Would that be okay for Adam, Wealth, and cool? All right, so I'll screen share or put you guys on the main stage in a moment, but let's just take a moment and put anything in the chat that you feel called to share.